or not, it's the dad, it's someone in the entourage, it's the player himself. You hope more than anything, it's the player himself.
4 months of silence, then a name surfaced, and the sport lost its mind. Alcaraz is coming back. Cincinnati gets the return everybody begged for. Celebrate fast because one tennis expert stopped staring at his wrist, opened the ranking sheet, and finally noticed what that page reveals. The biggest risk facing the Spaniard arrives before he strikes a single ball. That sheet has been public all week. Barely anyone read it. Take the settled part. Doctors signed off weeks ago. La Verdad reported this month that the tendon healed completely. His camp refused every shortcut, even drilling him left-handed to keep the nervous system alive while the joint rested. Boris Becker studied the clips and called him miles away. Wrong footage, wrong question. The threat waiting in Ohio has no medical name. 3,000 points vanish inside 24 days. One tune-up draw stands between 4 months of rust and a Grand Slam defense. Zverev leads by 320. Sinner hoarded every Masters 1,000 trophy this season, plus a cushion near 5,300. Something is about to break. Nobody sees it coming. Hit subscribe now, because this channel goes where highlight reels refuse to. So let's open the document that ended his season. The document is the ATP rankings page, and the figure printed beside his name reads 8,160 points. Third position on the list. Buried inside that total sits a block of 3,000 earned across 11 days, last August and early September, when he lifted the Cincinnati trophy and then took down Jannik Sinner in 4 sets at Flushing Meadows to reclaim the world #1 spot. Roughly 37% of everything holding him up right now was built during a 2-week stretch of hard-court tennis 12 months ago. Every single one of those points comes off the board between the 23rd of August and the 13th of September. Understanding why requires a quick look at how the tour actually counts. Rankings operate on a rolling 52-week cycle, so a player carries his results forward for 1 calendar year and then surrenders them the moment the same tournament comes around again. Whatever he produced in Ohio last summer expires the instant this year's champion is crowned. New York works identically. There is no protection, no grace period, no adjustment for a player who spent 4 months in a physiotherapy room instead of a locker room. So the arithmetic in front of him is brutal in a way no scan can capture. To stand still, he needs to win the Cincinnati Open again and then win the US Open again, back-to-back, with 1 competitive week in his legs after the longest layoff of his professional life. Anything less than a repeat of both titles means his ranking falls. The only question left is how far. Consider what a realistic outcome actually pays. The Cincinnati draw has expanded to 96 players, with the top 32 seeds handed first-round byes, which means he enters at the second round and needs 3 wins simply to reach the quarterfinals. A loss in his opening match returns 50 points. Reaching the last 16 banks 100, quarterfinal elimination is worth 200, and even a run to the semifinals delivers 400 against the 1,000 he must replace. Take the most optimistic non-title scenario on that list, and he still hands back 600 points before New York has even begun. Now measure that against the man directly above him. Alexander Zverev holds second place with 8,480, a margin of just 320. The German has already banked a Roland Garros title this season on the Paris clay and reached the Wimbledon final, so he arrives in America with confidence and no obvious reason to collapse. Should the Spaniard lose in the 3rd round in Ohio while Zverev reaches a quarterfinal, the gap closes and reverses without anyone hitting a spectacular shot. Falling to 4th is not a dramatic scenario, it is the default outcome of ordinary results. Look downward from 3rd place and the picture changes character completely. Felix Auger-Aliassime occupies 4th on 4,740, with Alex de Minaur behind him on 4,110. So nobody from that group is threatening to climb into the argument this summer. The entire ranking battle available to him over the next month is a private duel with one German, decided by a margin thinner than the reward for reaching a single quarterfinal. Small margins of that type tend to be settled by fitness and rhythm rather than talent, which is precisely the department where he currently has nothing in the bank. 4th place matters more than pride, and here the damage compounds in a way most viewers never think about. Grand Slam seedings at Flushing Meadows follow the rankings published shortly before the tournament, and the draw is constructed so that the top 4 seeds cannot meet before the semifinals. Seeds 5 through 8 occupy a different tier entirely, one where a quarterfinal against the world number 1 becomes structurally possible. Slip out of the top 4 and the bracket stops protecting him. A player returning from a wrist injury could then face Sinner 2 rounds earlier than the schedule would otherwise allow, in a match he cannot afford to lose, defending 2,000 points he won on that same court 11 months earlier. Sinner, meanwhile, walks into the identical fortnight carrying a fraction of the exposure. His Cincinnati commitment amounts to 650 points from the final he was forced to abandon through illness, and New York costs him 1,300 as the beaten finalist. Add those together and the Italian is protecting 1,950 across the North American swing while the Spaniard protects 3,000. The gap in what each man stands to lose is over 1,000 points before either of them strikes a ball, and the ceiling works the same way in reverse. Victory in Ohio would earn Sinner a net gain of 350, and a title in New York would add 700 to a total that already dwarfs everyone else's. That total currently sits at 13,450. The Italian has assembled a season with almost no historical parallel, sweeping all 5 Masters 1,000 events contested so far in 2026 at Indian Wells, Miami, Monte Carlo, Madrid, and Rome, then defending his Wimbledon crown against Zverev for a second consecutive year. 6 titles are already in the cabinet. His advantage over second place stands at 4,970, and the cushion separating him from the man this video is about has grown beyond 5,200. Year-end number 1 is effectively settled, which frees him from every kind of pressure except the sort he applies to himself. Reconstruct the Spaniard's season before the injury and the loss becomes sharper still. January delivered the Australian Open, his first title in Melbourne and the piece that completed the career Grand Slam at 22, making him the youngest man in the sport's history to hold all 4. Doha followed with another trophy. The Sunshine Double in March proved quieter than expected, and April brought a Monte Carlo final where Sinner beat him. Then came Barcelona and a single stretched return against a Finnish opponent ranked outside the elite, which ended a campaign that had begun with the most complete achievement of his career. Set the 2 situations side by side and the asymmetry becomes almost uncomfortable. One player enters with 7 months of accumulated match sharpness, a settled body, and nothing meaningful to protect. The other has not struck a competitive ball since the 14th of April, when he beat Otto Virtanen in the opening round in Barcelona and walked off with an inflamed tendon sheath in his right wrist. He never played the next match. Madrid disappeared, then Rome, then a Roland Garros title he had won twice in succession, then Queens, then Wimbledon, and finally Montreal, which was quietly removed from his schedule earlier this month. 4 months of absence produces consequences that extend well past a ranking column. Match rhythm is not a metaphor. It is a physical and cognitive state built through repetition under pressure, and it decays fast. Serving under a tight scoreline, reading a second serve from an opponent who has been on tour all year, choosing between a defensive slice and an outright winner while the legs are heavy in the 3rd set, none of that can be manufactured on a practice court in Murcia. His opponents in Ohio will have played somewhere between 40 and 60 competitive matches this season. He will have played one in April and lost the ability to finish it. Worth remembering too that the tour does have a mechanism for players in his situation, and he does not qualify for it. Protected rankings exist to shield athletes forced into long absences, allowing entry into tournaments using an earlier position rather than a collapsed one, and 3 competitors in the Cincinnati field are using exactly that provision. Holger Rune, Juncheng Shang, and Lois Boisson all appear on the entry lists under protected status. The rule requires an absence considerably longer than 4 months, which places the Spaniard in an awkward middle zone, away long enough to lose almost everything, not away long enough to receive any institutional cushion for it. The physical dimension deserves honesty rather than panic. Tenosynovitis involves inflammation of the sheath surrounding a tendon, and in this case, the affected joint belongs to his dominant hand. Grip strength runs directly through that structure, as does the rotational snap that generates topspin on the forehand. Hard courts amplify the problem because the ball arrives faster and sits lower off the surface than on clay, transmitting more shock through the racket into the arm on every strike. Weeks of practice hitting cannot fully replicate the forces produced when a professional serves at pace for 2 hours in humid Ohio conditions. The load question is exactly what Boris Becker was reacting to. Those practice clips showed gentle forehands with controlled swings and careful attention to footwork, a session designed to rebuild confidence rather than test the joint under stress. Analysts examining the same footage pointed out that the workload running through that wrist would need multiplying several times over before competitive tennis became realistic, and some concluded a comeback late in the calendar year looked more probable than an August return. The medical clearance that followed changed the timeline, yet it did not change the underlying principle. Tissue that has healed still needs conditioning, and conditioning takes weeks that are no longer available. Beneath the physiology lies something harder to measure and arguably more dangerous. Elite players spend a decade automating their movement patterns until shot selection happens below conscious thought. Serious injury interrupts that automation, and even after tissue repairs completely, the brain retains a memory of the pain. Neural caution then leaks into decisions that were previously instinctive, subtly altering racket acceleration, contact points, and the willingness to commit fully to an aggressive stroke. Statistics rarely capture it in the first weeks, because the numbers look broadly normal while something essential has quietly gone missing. His game is unusually vulnerable to precisely that kind of interference. The drop shot that has become his signature demands soft hands and fine wrist control at the moment of contact. The forehand he takes on the rise from inside the baseline requires full commitment through the ball with no hesitation whatsoever. Running angles struck at full stretch, the shots that make highlight packages and break opponents' spirits, depend on trusting a joint to absorb force at an awkward position. Remove trust from any of those and what remains is a very good player rather than a generational one. Tennis history supplies uncomfortable precedents here. Juan Martín del Potro won the 2009 US Open at 20, then spent years cycling through wrist surgeries that stripped the forehand which had made him a champion. Dominic Thiem lifted the 2020 US Open trophy and suffered a wrist injury the following June, returning to a tour where the ball simply refused to come off his racket the way it once had, and retiring in 2024 without recapturing his level. Neither man lacked talent, work ethic, or medical support. Both discovered that wrists can heal completely on paper, while a career quietly changes shape underneath. None of this means the Spaniard is heading toward the same fate, and his camp has behaved in a manner that deserves genuine credit. Rather than chasing an early comeback, his team spent 3 months refusing to name a date, keeping him in the gym and even training him left-handed to maintain neuromuscular activation while the injured side rested. The wrist guard came off in mid-June. Light right-handed hitting resumed in early July. Montreal was surrendered without hesitation once it became clear that competing there would compress his preparation into something reckless. Patience of that kind is rare in modern professional sport, where countdowns and dramatic training footage usually push athletes toward the earliest possible return. He has also handled cold starts before. The 2023 Australian Open passed him by entirely because of injury, and he recovered to finish that season as a Wimbledon champion. At 23, he holds 7 major titles, 26 tour trophies, a career record of 302 wins against 68 defeats, and the distinction of being the youngest man ever to complete the career Grand Slam, which he achieved in Melbourne in January. Writing him off after 4 difficult months would be foolish, and anyone doing so has not been paying attention to the last 5 years. There is an additional irony sitting inside the 1,000 points he must defend in Ohio. His 2025 title there was completed when Sinner, visibly unwell, retired after roughly 20 minutes of the final. The trophy is legitimate and the points are real, yet the champion barely had to play a championship match to collect them. 12 months on, those same 1,000 points must be replaced through a full week of hard-court tennis against a field containing every top 10 player on the planet, by a man whose competitive preparation consists of practice sessions in Murcia. Few sporting ledgers are as unforgiving as that one. What Cincinnati genuinely represents, then, is a diagnostic exercise dressed up as a title defense. The tournament runs at the Lindner Family Tennis Center in Mason, Ohio, with qualifying from the 11th of August and the men's final scheduled for Sunday the 23rd, the first time the event has closed on a Sunday. Every member of the ATP Top 10 has entered, including Djokovic, Medvedev, Shelton, Fritz, Cobolli, De Minaur, and Auger Aliassime, alongside 10 former champions of the event spread across both draws. Anyone hoping for a gentle reintroduction should look at that list again. The calendar compression afterwards is the detail almost nobody discusses. Should he reach the final in Ohio on the 23rd, exactly 1 week separates that match from the opening of the US Open main draw on the 30th. Deep runs at a Masters 1000 event leave players physically depleted, and recovery time of 7 days is thin even for someone who has been competing continuously. For an athlete whose body has not absorbed tournament load since spring, that window borders on unreasonable. Conversely, an early exit hands him rest and practice time while costing him the ranking points and the match sharpness he desperately needs. Both outcomes carry a penalty, which is the essence of the trap. Expectation will add its own weight once the gates open. Ohio has been waiting on this comeback since spring. Ticket demand around his matches will be extraordinary, and the campus itself has been transformed by a renovation that pushed the singles draws up to 96 players and stretched the schedule across 13 days. Crowds arriving to witness a resurrection rarely calibrate their hopes to the realities of rehabilitation. Every routine error will be examined for medical meaning, every tight game will be read as evidence, and a player already managing physical uncertainty will be doing so inside a stadium that wants a story rather than a diagnosis. One caveat deserves stating plainly before anybody books a flight. Appearing on an entry list is not the same as walking onto a match court, and the Wire reports covering this announcement were careful with their language. Reuters described him as targeting a return, while the AFP write-up hedged with a conditional about whether he would actually start. Players withdraw from tournaments in the final week routinely, and a single uncomfortable practice session in Ohio could end the plan before the draw is even published. Given the strategic value of arriving in New York healthy rather than arriving in Ohio brave, the possibility of a late change is real. The comeback is scheduled. Confirmation of it lands only when the first serve is struck. So the sensible thing to watch in Ohio has nothing to do with whether he grimaces or flexes his hand between points. Broadcasters will focus there because it makes obvious television, and it will tell you almost nothing. The revealing evidence sits elsewhere. Count how often he attempts the drop shot in the second set of a tight match. Notice whether he steps into the court on a short ball or waits for it to drop. Watch his second serve percentage under pressure because a protected wrist shortens the swing and flattens the kick. Track whether he plays the running forehand at full stretch or slices it back and resets. Those choices will expose the state of his trust long before any physiotherapist issues a statement. Frame the season honestly and the picture clarifies. His 2026 in the race for world number 1 ended somewhere in a Barcelona changing room in April, and no result in Ohio can retrieve it. Sinner's lead is mathematically comfortable enough that a year-end coronation is close to certain. What remains available is New York, a title he holds on a surface that suits him at a tournament where he has already beaten the current world number 1 in a final. That single objective is what the next month exists to serve, and every ranking point he sheds along the way makes the path toward it steeper. The 2025 version of him arrived in Cincinnati with momentum, confidence, and a body that had carried him through a monstrous clay season. This edition arrives with a healed joint, an empty match log, a shrinking ranking cushion, and a rival playing the finest tennis of an already extraordinary career. The wrist story is finished, and it was never the real one anyway. What waits for him in Ohio is a numbers problem disguised as a homecoming, and the sport is about to find out whether 4 months of patience bought him a future or simply cost him a season. Tell me below which outcome you expect when he walks onto that court in August, because the comment section on this channel usually reads the game better than the pundits do. Subscribe if this breakdown gave you something the highlight reels never will, And stay tuned, because the moment the Cincinnati draw is released, we will be analyzing exactly how much trouble that bracket has put him in.